Hello and welcome to Wasted Plotential, where we discuss the wasted potential of our favourite plotlines. Though I'd hardly call this one of my favourite plotlines. One of the biggest issues with NetherRealm story modes is that the villains very rarely get to actually achieve any victories, which makes them impossible to take seriously as threats. Let's look at the final bosses. Dark Kahn, Shao Kahn, Regime Superman, Brainiac, Kronika. Shinnok gets to beat Sonya in a cutscene, which is something. I guess you could count times when two playable characters face off at the end, like in Injustice 2. I don't count easily batting people aside or stealth kills here. Then, other villains that are supposed to be among the most powerful characters. Bi-Han, Shang Tsung, Quan Chi, Goro, Kintaro, Regime Wonder Woman, Doomsday, Revenant Liu Kang and Kung Lao, Geras, Cetrion. Even an Elder God doesn't get to win any fights here. For all its flaws, Street Fighter V at least got this right. Every character gets at least one win, including Bison's victory over three of the most powerful characters in the canon. Bison comes off as a genuine threat, while Elder Gods and Kryptonians do not. This is something I want to fix here. Another thing in serious need of fixing is the mass deaths of the heroes. The sheer number of losses wouldn't have been so bad if they'd spread them out more. Having it happen in one scene is already a contrivance, but the way everyone has to engage Sindel one at a time with no weapons or powers is an even bigger contrivance that ruins the entire scene. Part of the issue with fixing it though is that most of the characters that die here are introduced in the final third, need time in that third to show off their augments, or would have the most impactful deaths if Sindel killed them. So it's not an easy thing to fix, but we'll see what we can do. Naturally, we're going to assume the chapter system is gone, removing that crippling limiter from the story. If you think I'm adding too many fights to the existing 67 here, bear in mind that some existing filler battles are being cut to make room. This also fixes another issue, that certain characters are only played as before they attain their iconic status. Jax before the metal arms and Cyrax before the cyberization. If they can be used at any time, we get to use these. Something SF5 had that works really well, certainly more so than MVCI, is generic NPCs the player can fight. This game has them in challenge towers, so I don't see why the story mode can't use them. You could easily take all those generic extras watching the fights, give them the moveset of an existing character but without special moves, and let us fight them. That way characters get to win more fights without making other characters look weaker by losing these fights. I'm not going to get into these fights much in this video, but you can easily imagine there are a few sprinkled around the narrative. Let's begin with a character who needs these alterations. Goro. Since there's no real tournament structure, you can easily showcase Goro's might by having him quickly toss aside a ton of generic goons like that scene in the movie. Of course, to prove he's not just mighty in comparison to these nobodies, have him beat a real character. But since we need the heroes to live past MK1, we need a reason for Goro to not kill them when he wins. Heroes disliking killing is a good enough reason for the villains to live, but we need something more specific for the villainous victor. Goro has dominated the tournament since his defeat of Kung Lao, and no one since has really come close. He's bored of this tournament and is just happy his service to Shang Tsung is almost over. Let him fight someone who can give him a run for his money. Johnny Cage and/or Kung Lao. He defeats them, but they put up the best fight he's had in centuries. As a sign of respect, he lets them live. With Kung Lao, this could be set up for a later rematch, with him impetuously trying to avenge his ancestor here, only to lose the fight. Goro sees the potential in him, however, and wants to see how much better he can become before their next fight. Their rematch in Outworld sees Lao successfully defeat Goro, but return the favour by showing him mercy, as the two warriors have now earned each other's respect. Shao Kahn likewise needs to score some wins. Some are obvious. Rather than snapping Kung Lao's neck, he fights him in a tournament bout and defeats him. Unlike Goro, Kahn has no respect for Kung Lao and finishes him. During the invasion, Kahn defeats Johnny and Sonya in an endurance match while Raiden is mourning his big mistake. Raiden himself then loses a fight to Kahn before the Elder Gods power him up for the rematch. But the main villain needs more than 3 wins, even if those wins are against some tough opponents. I have 2 ideas. One is that when Kitana learns the truth about her past, she fights him and loses. Kahn spurs her to make an example of her at the Colosseum. The other is that when Sub-Zero challenges Scorpion, Kahn agrees, with the proviso that he has to fight Kahn afterwards should he win. Kahn has heard of Bi-Han's victory over Shinnok and wants to fight such a mighty foe, even if it's not the same Sub-Zero. Kuai Liang agrees, figuring that if the pecking order goes Scorpion, Bi-Han and Elder God, then Kahn will be no trouble if he can beat Scorpion. Sub-Zero beats Scorpion, then loses to Kahn. Sector and Cyrax interrupt Sub-Zero's execution to reclaim him for the Lin Kuei, offering their aid in Kahn's takeover of Earthrealm. Satisfied with his win and seeing the value of an Earthrealm faction to speed up his conquest, Kahn agrees. Fellow boss character Kintaro gets to defeat Unburnt Cabal, who uses Striker's moveset. Stryker intervenes before he can finish him off. Bi-Han, for one of the best fighters in the old timeline, is a complete joke in NetherRealm storyline. An easy fix is to give him a flashback after he first encounters Scorpion. The flashback is to their battle in Mythologies. He then scores a victory over Sonya in Goro's lair, but Raiden intervenes to help her escape. This also explains her not competing in the tournament after this. As Noob, he could defeat Kuai Liang, who holds back against him in the cemetery, and kill him, the latter's holding back, making his death more believable. Ermac is another heavily nerfed top tier in need of some wins. His defeat of Johnny Cage is now playable, as is his ruination of Jax, which is an endurance match with Sonya thrown in. He also receives a victory over Stryker in the invasion. He's about to finish him off when Nightwolf intervenes and uses his spirit powers to cause him serious harm, forcing him to flee. Shang Tsung can fight Ermac right after this to keep the souls bound to Kahn's will. He also fights Quan Chi during the invasion to put him in his place. A flashback to his younger days as the champion could also be included. Upon her resurrection, Sindel immediately attacks Quan Chi, who can defeat her thanks to her weakened state, and applies his mind control afterwards. This lets the desert stage be playable in the story as well. And obviously, Sindel has some sort of tattered burial attire on instead of being naked. We can also give him a flashback win against Bi-Han when Noob's identity is revealed. Mileena poses as Kitana to get close to Jade and then defeat her, only to be scared off by the appearance of Raiden's group. She can also defeat Stryker, only to be taken down by Raiden. Shiva is on the hunt for Kitana in Earthrealm, but Jade intervenes to save her friend and is killed after the endurance match. Jax then arrives to fight Shiva, giving us our Metal Arm Jax fight. Kano ambushes Sonya and Jax during the invasion and manages to kill Jax as a play on the whole Sonya's murdered partner thing. Kano has only spurred Sonya's wrath by the presence of Baraka, who defeats her. Her rage is such that she gets right back up and blasts Baraka off a building to explain his absence from here on, but Kano has made his escape in the confusion. The massacre is now a joint attack by Sindel and the Lin Kuei together. The cyborgs justify Sindel getting to fight everyone one at a time to make it less contrived. Sector can have a win in the lead up to the Outworld tournament. Raiden seeks the renegade Cyrax out to ask for his aid. He agrees, but he is ambushed by Sector shortly after Raiden leaves. He later kills Smoke during the joint attack. I mean, why put Smoke in peril here and have him live if he's just going to die later in the same scene? Let him die to Sector instead to make the massacre more believable. On a related note, we can swap Cyrax and Sector's Outworld battles and have Cyrax defeat Smoke before Raiden intervenes. The generic units throw their lives away so Cyrax can escape. Giving him at least one win prevents the cyberization from looking like it made him a worse fighter. Reptile joins Sindel's assault and has a rematch with the two cops. Stryker takes a lethal acid shot for Kabal to make up for not saving him from Kintaro, leading to Kabal taking Reptile down. Reptile escapes with Sector and Cyrax as Kabal is attacked by Sindel. She then kills him and Kitana in proper fights before Nightwolf dies to stop her, leaving only the original four alive. We also need to fix Johnny Cage. See, the idea of Johnny stepping up as the hero to oppose Shinnok has been in place since his Armageddon bio, where he united the forces of light against Shinnok's Dark Alliance. They then began setting it up again in 2011 with the new backstory they planned to pay off in MKX, since they knew it was the only way anyone could buy into him beating Shinnok. This raises the question, why does Johnny spend chapters 2 to 16 getting his ass kicked in increasingly easy ways? He needs some wins after the first act. He can get a tournament win before losing to Ermac, maybe moving the existing Baraka or Reptile fight here instead. He also beats up someone like Scorpion in Earthrealm before Motaro finds him, his long day of fighting excusing Motaro's utter dominance. You can also lose to Sindel in a proper fight to make him stand out as the only person to really stand against Sindel and not die. Our final list of fights, making use of these ideas and player tag mechanics, dropping some of the less important fights and replacing some to avoid repeat fights, goes something like this. Johnny Cage vs Reptile, Johnny Cage vs Kano, Sub-Zero vs Sonya Blade, Sonya Blade vs Kano, Shang Tsung vs Generics, Sub-Zero vs Scorpion, Scorpion vs Kung Lao, Scorpion vs Sub-Zero, Cyrax vs Johnny Cage, Cyrax vs Sector, Liu Kang vs Scorpion, Goro vs Generics, Goro vs Kung Lao, Liu Kang vs Goro, Liu Kang vs Shang Tsung, Sector vs Cyrax, Jax vs Baraka, Jax and Johnny Cage vs Jade, Smoke vs Kitana, Smoke vs Shang Tsung posing as Sub-Zero, Cyrax vs Smoke, Sub-Zero vs Sector, Ermac vs Sonya Blade and Jax, Sub-Zero vs Ermac, Sub-Zero vs Scorpion, Shao Kahn vs Sub-Zero, Kitana vs Jade, Kitana vs Mileena, Kitana vs Shang Tsung, Shao Kahn vs Kitana, Jade vs Reptile, Jade vs Shiva, Mileena vs Jade, Kung Lao vs Goro, Johnny Cage vs Baraka, Ermac vs Johnny Cage, Kung Lao vs Shang Tsung, Shao Kahn vs Kung Lao, Liu Kang vs Shao Kahn, Quan Chi vs Sindel, Shiva vs Katana and Jade, Jax and Sonya Blade vs Shiva, Striker vs Reptile, Johnny Cage vs Scorpion, Melina vs Striker, Kintaro vs Cabal, Striker vs Kintaro, Ermac vs Striker, Shang Tsung vs Ermac, Kano vs Jax, Baraka vs Sonya Blade, Shang Tsung vs Quan Chi, Cabal vs Kano, Cabal vs Melina, Cabal and Striker vs Cyber Sub-Zero, Cyber Sub-Zero vs Sector, Cyber Sub-Zero vs Goro and Kintaro, Quan Chi vs Sub-Zero, Noob Saibot vs Cyber Sub-Zero, Nightwolf vs Noob Saibot, Sindel vs Johnny Cage, Reptile vs Striker, Cabal vs Reptile, Sindel vs Cabal, Sector vs Smoke, Nightwolf vs Sector, Sindel vs Katana, Nightwolf vs Sindel, Raiden vs Kung Lao, Katana and Nightwolf, Raiden vs Liu Kang, Shao Kahn vs Johnny Cage and Sonya Blade, Shao Kahn vs Raiden, Raiden vs Shao Kahn. And there you have it. With only an additional 6 fights, everyone gets at least 1 win, characters are useful outside of a single scene, and the huge losses are less contrived and get more time for dramatic death scenes. It's not perfect, but I think this shows how much better even NetherRealm's existing stories would be if they reworked the structure a bit. Obviously, it would be even better if they built the narrative without character chapters rather than attempt to remove character chapters from a story that was built around them. If you liked this video, why not subscribe and support me on Patreon like these fine people here? If not, then make sure to share it with your enemies so they can suffer along with you. Today's recommended playlist is Mortal May by me because the month is over and I can finally move on from this broken fucking franchise for a bit.